Secretary, Priti Patel, who is currently on a visit to Bahrain. Good morning, Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Morning, Trevor.
You're there with a lot of other foreign policy bigwigs. What's the take out there on what's happened overnight?
Well, I think, first of all, how quickly events have moved. Now, I'm here at a strategic security dialogue, a conference and a forum with others. And over the last few days, there's been much discussion about what has been going on in Syria and obviously some of the key players. But the reality is overnight, things have moved very, very quickly. And of course, that means that we all need to be watching the current situation very carefully. I think there is a degree of, similar thought here that it's too early to know how this is going to pan out. But ultimately, Trevor, this is about the Syrian people. Syrians need to be protected, all communities and groups, including all minorities. So we all need to look very carefully about how we respond. And certainly from the perspective of this region, as ever, it's a case of how we work together to, I think, effectively try and influence the right kind of outcome, put the Syrian people first, but also look at the sort of governance structures that could occupy Syria going forward and what that means for us, not just abroad in this region, but actually for us domestically at home.
I'm imagining that you're sitting there with people from all around the globe, and they're all busy checking their phones every 5 minutes to see what's going on. Who's most anxious?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a degree of anxiety across this region, full stop. Primarily because there are so many challenges that have affected this region. I think first and foremost, if we look at Syria and just look at some of the immediate neighbouring countries, they themselves have been under a great deal of pressure. I raised some of these points in Parliament just last week around drugs and ammunition that seem to be proliferating. I think the anxiety is very much as a case of we don't quite know the full extent of what's going on. There are wider questions, Trevor, even about Assad's regime, his weapon stocks and supplies, what could go on and happen on the ground, which comes back to my point about the protection of the Syrian people and minority groups. I think realistically, we have a responsibility with our friends and allies and close partners in this region to look at how we can structure with Syria now a potential peace plan, but taking into account the new realities, particularly of this group, HTS, which is a proscribed organisation. And there'll be certain things that I'm sure our government back home will be doing through our security and intelligence network. And in terms of the people that I'm with right now, there are many security and intelligence operatives here who are having those conversations and discussions. So, like I said, this is a move-in issue. There'll be an element of fog of war. There's a lot of information that, we don't actually know about, but obviously some of this will already be within the intelligence frameworks.
You raised the point of HTS's proscription. We talked to John Soares a little while ago, and he was, I think, suggesting that, frankly, realistically, continued proscription of this organisation isn't the way to go. Would you agree with that?
I'm sure the government will have to look at all of this. I can't sit here and talk about an organisation that was prescribed many, many years ago. What I would suggest, Trevor, and I would have the confidence of the government doing this through our intelligence and security systems, that there will be a cross-government review and a coordinated review of the security and defence implications, as well as the terrorist risks, including some of the wider issues around this organisation. They will have to now assess the threat that HTS poses immediately for our own interests, as well as for Syria's interests and the wider region. Because as you've said, and I've touched on, this is a proscribed organisation. So we'll need to look at this, effectively run a very, very thick slide rule over all the implications. That's the right thing to do. I don't think we can speculate right now on any of this, Trevor. It's too early, but we need our people back at home to do all the risk assessments and work out where we stand with them and what this actually means for Syria in the short and medium term.
Can I just quickly return to a point which you made in passing, which is about Syria's or Mr. Assad's stockpile of weaponry? And I suspect you're talking not just about conventional guns, but perhaps some kind of weaponry, chemical weapons and so forth. Is that something that worries you?
Of course it does. We've had, over the last decade, this war has been going on for over a decade. We know of the number of casualties. We've seen the atrocities and the barbarity that's taken place under Assad's regime. We've discussed this in Parliament. We've had votes in Parliament, and we've seen the history of Assad's regime. I think it's right and a legitimate question that we should, again, ask our intelligence networks to be looking at. This comes back to ultimately protection of the Syrian people, but also the minorities within Syria and other groups. So I think these are live concerns and legitimate issues. And I can certainly say that, I would be wanting to discuss much of this with the government going forward and looking at how we can be a constructive voice on this issue, but other issues around Syria's future and its future constitution and the composition of its future government.
Of course, there's a set of wider implications for the region. How do you read it? Stronger Turkey, maybe Russian withdrawal, who knows, from Iran? What's your take?
I think, first of all, there's clearly an element of the Turkish footprint is relevant here. It really is. I've been here at a discussion, a dialogue where Turkey have been actively speaking, representatives from the Turkish government, they've been actively speaking about what is going on in Syria. So there's no question that they have equities here and they're going to be a voice in all of this.
Do you think they knew? Did you think they knew what was going to happen?
Well, I can't speculate on that. They're closer to it, and obviously they'll have access to all sorts of reports and information that I suspect we don't even know about. On the Russian side of this conflict, it's clear that they have been consumed with Ukraine, and the fact that we've seen such fast movement, obviously in Syria around Damascus so quickly, tells us something, obviously, about they've scaled back. The reality is, though, Trevor, we have the long-standing issue of Iran, Iranian proxies, Iranian influence across the region. And this is a long-standing challenge for all of us. And I think certainly in this part of the world, and also from a UK perspective, we have to work incredibly hard now to try and address some of these wider challenges. And of course, we can't do this ourselves. We'll do this with our allies and friends in this region, but also we will be looking very clearly to America going forward as we move into the new year too.
And lastly, Israel. There are two ways of reading the situation for Israel, that actually they've weakened the Iranian proxies, the Hezbollah and so on, and that's partly what's led to this situation. And the other, which is now there are people potentially who will, in a sense, be more of a threat to Israel than Assad was. How do you read it?
Well, I think it's too early. Like I said, I don't want to be speculating on anything right now. The reality is we know of Israel and the way in which they have been targeting Iran and the direct attacks, particularly around Hezbollah. The reality is right now we are going to have to work with the information that becomes public and obviously is shared through the security networks as well. We need to just watch this situation carefully. Ensure actually that we put the Syrian people first, protect all the key groups and interests. And as I've said, I think Britain has a role to play. We've just chaired the Security Council. We've been a strong voice there. We can certainly be a positive and constructive influence through our intelligence and information, but some of the structures and the way in which we've conducted ourselves around Syria and stood up for the Syrian people over the last decade. And I think that absolutely remains.